You've tried to understand this. You've thought about it from every angle. You've watched videos. You've reflected. You've tried to piece it together. And no matter how close you feel, you still can't quite figure it out. And that's the part that frustrates you the most. Because it feels like the answer is right there, just out of reach. But here's the truth. The reason you can't figure it out is the same reason you're closer than you think. You're not doing anything wrong. This isn't a lack of intelligence. It's not because you're missing some key piece of information. In fact, if anything, you've probably been trying harder than most. You sit with it. You question things. You notice something feels off about the way you've been seeing life. And yet, every time you try to grasp it, it slips away. That loop, trying to understand something that won't fully land, is exhausting. Because it feels like you should be able to figure it out, but you can't. And that tension is exactly where this begins to shift. What if the problem isn't that you can't figure it out? What if the problem is that you're trying to? Because the way you've been taught to understand things is through thinking, through defining, analyzing, breaking things into pieces so they make sense. But this doesn't work that way. The more you try to pin it down, the further away it feels. Not because it's complicated, but because it's not something that can be turned into an object. You're trying to look at it when it's actually what you're looking from. You've already experienced this more times than you realize. That moment after a long day when everything goes quiet for a second, or that brief pause in the middle of thinking where nothing is being analyzed, or the stillness when you're just sitting somewhere, not trying to fix anything, not chasing anything, just there. There's no confusion in that moment. There's no need to figure anything out. And yet, nothing is missing. That's the part you keep overlooking. Because your mind jumps back in and says, wait, what was that? Let me understand it. And the moment it does, it's gone. What you're trying to figure out is not something separate from you. It's not an idea. It's not a realization that you get and hold on to. It's what remains when you stop trying to turn everything into something you can understand. It's the quiet presence that's already here, before the question even forms. The reason you can't figure it out is because it's not something you can stand outside of and observe. It's what's always been here, while every attempt to understand it came and went. The mind turns everything into a problem to solve. That's what it does. So when it encounters something it can't reduce, it assumes something is wrong. I'm not getting it. I need to try harder. I'm missing something. But what if that's the illusion? What if nothing is missing? And the only thing happening is that the mind has reached its limit. You're not stuck. You've just reached the edge of what thinking can do. And instead of recognizing that, You've been trying to push past it with the same tool. This shows up in ways you don't always notice. You sit there trying to figure yourself out. Why you feel the way you do. What you should do next. Who you are. And the more you think, the more tangled it gets. Or you watch videos like this, hoping something will finally click. And it almost does. But then your mind tries to lock it in, define it, and explain it. And the clarity disappears. Even in conversations, you might catch a moment where you're fully present, not overthinking. Then suddenly, you become aware of it, and it's gone. That's the pattern. The moment is clear until you try to understand it. But here's how this shifts. Stop trying to hold on to it. Stop trying to recreate it. The next time that quiet moment appears, don't label it. Don't analyze it. Don't turn it into something you need to remember. Just let it be what it already is. Because the more you leave it alone, the more obvious it becomes. You're not failing to figure this out. You're discovering that it was never something to figure out in the first place. And that's why it feels so close. Because it is. Not as something you reach, but as something you stop overlooking. There comes a point where your mind can't carry you any further. You've thought about it from every angle. You've tried to explain your feelings. You've searched for the right words. And still, something doesn't move. Because some of the biggest shifts in your life don't happen when you finally understand. They happen when understanding stops. They happen in the strange moment when the mind goes quiet. Not because it found the answer, but because it reached its limit. And in that silence, something else begins to show itself. Not a theory, not a concept, but a direct recognition. And once that happens, everything changes. Most people have been trained to believe that clarity comes through more thought, more analysis, more interpretation, more mental effort. So when life starts feeling strange, heavy, or disconnected, the first instinct is to understand it, to solve it mentally, to turn it into something manageable. But there are moments in life where the mind itself becomes the barrier. Not because the mind is evil, not because thought is useless, but because thought has limits. And when you come to the edge of those limits, you are standing at the doorway of something deeper. In this video, we're going to talk about that moment, when your need to understand begins to fall apart, and a different kind of seeing begins. Not through force, not through effort, but through direct recognition. What changes in that moment is not just what you know, it's how you exist. The mind feels safe when it can label things. If you can explain why you feel off, you feel a little more in control. If you can define your pain, organize your confusion, or frame your spiritual longing in clean language, It feels like progress. And sometimes it is. But the mind has a hidden habit. It believes that if it can understand something, it has touched the truth of it. That's the illusion. Because explanation is not the same as contact. You can explain love and still be closed off. You can explain presence and still be absent. You can explain spiritual truth and still live from tension, fear, and separation. This is why so many people know so much, yet still feel disconnected. Their mind is full, but their being is untouched. And eventually life starts cornering you into this realization. You can feel it when you've read all the books, watched all of the videos, listened to all of the teachings, and still something in you quietly says, I'm still not there. That frustration matters, because it begins to reveal that the mind cannot enter what is only available through direct seeing. There is usually a moment where your normal way of functioning begins to fail. Maybe you're sitting alone after a long day, trying to figure out why nothing feels right anymore. Maybe you're in the middle of an argument and suddenly realize you're not even reacting to the person in front of you. You're reacting to a pattern. Maybe you're lying in bed, exhausted, unable to think your way back into peace. This is the breaking point. Not dramatic on the outside, but deep on the inside. Because what's actually breaking is your trust in thought as the thing that will save you. And at first, that can feel terrifying. The mind doesn't like losing authority. It doesn't like reaching its limit. It doesn't like not knowing. So when thought stops working, many people panic. They think they're falling apart. But often, what feels like collapse is the beginning of honesty. You are starting to see that your constant interpreting has not brought you home. That recognition hurts, but it's clean. It is the moment false certainty starts losing its grip. Then comes the gap. A brief pause. A silence. A moment where the machinery of explanation slows down. And in that gap, something unusual happens. You don't become smarter. You don't gain a new belief. You don't suddenly assemble the perfect spiritual sentence. You just see. You notice the room, your breath, the fact that awareness is here before the next thought appears, the fact that something in you is present even when the mind has nothing useful to say. This is subtle, so subtle that most people miss it, because they are trained to look for fireworks, not stillness. They are trained to look for answers, not immediacy. They are trained to chase meaning, not notice presence. But this gap is sacred, because it shows you that reality does not disappear when understanding pauses. In fact, for the first time, reality may feel closer. And this is where the monad begins to be recognized, not as an idea to adopt, but as a silent wholeness that was here before your explanation started, and remains after they stop. Not separate from you, not far away, not something mystical in the sense of unreachable. It is the underlying presence that does not need the mind's permission to exist. Once this begins to be seen, your relationship with life starts to change. Not because all your problems vanish, not because you become emotionally numb, but because you are no longer filtering every moment through the demand to mentally grasp it first. You begin to experience life more directly. A hard conversation is still hard, but there is more space around it. A wave of sadness still comes, but it no longer defines the whole field. A moment of uncertainty still arises, but it is not instantly turned into an identity crisis. This is what changes in real life. You stop trying to dominate experience through understanding. You start allowing experience to be seen as it is. And strangely, this makes you more grounded, not less. Because when the mind stops compulsively interfering, you begin responding instead of constantly reacting. You listen more clearly. You feel more honestly. You speak with less performance. You stop building so much tension around needing everything to make sense immediately. And that's a major shift. Because most suffering is not just pain. It's pain plus resistance. Confusion plus panic. Emotion plus the desperate need to explain it away. When that extra layer loosens, life opens. This is the deepest part. When understanding stops being your main anchor, you begin to recognize that what you are is not the stream of thought trying to keep reality organized. What you are is prior to that. Still here before the interpretation. Still here during the confusion. Still here after the mind runs out of language. This is why everything changes. Not because the world turns magic overnight, but because the false center begins to lose its throne. You stop living as if you are the only one who thinks, labels, and defends. You start recognizing the deeper field in which all of that appears. That deeper field is not distant. It's not theoretical. It is what has been here the whole time. The monad is not reached through perfect understanding. It is recognized when the noise of separation softens enough for what has always been whole to become obvious. And once even a glimpse of that happens, you can't fully return to the old way of living. You may still get caught in thought. You may still overanalyze. You may still forget. But something inside of you knows. You know the mind is not the whole story anymore. And that changes the way you walk, speak, relate, suffer, and return. So, if you're in a season where nothing makes sense the way it used to, don't rush to fill that space too quickly. Don't assume that confusion means you're failing. Don't assume that the loss of mental certainty means something has gone wrong. You may be standing in one of the most important thresholds of your life. The moment you stop understanding is not always the moment you lose the path. Sometimes, it's the moment the false path ends. And what remains is quieter, deeper, and more real than anything the mind could construct. Not because you figured it out, but because for a moment, you stop standing between yourself and what has always been here. You've been trying to think your way out of this, and the more you think, the more stuck you feel. It's like your mind keeps looping the same questions, and no matter how much you analyze it, nothing actually changes. Because the thing you're using to escape the loop is the loop itself. You're not doing anything wrong. In fact, this is exactly what you were taught to do. When something feels off, you think about it. When something hurts, you try to understand it. When life feels uncertain, you search for clarity. So you go deeper into thought. You replay conversations. You analyze your emotions. You try to find the right answer. But instead of relief, you feel heavier, more tense, more disconnected, more stuck in your own head. And the worst part is, it feels like thinking should work, but it doesn't. Here's what most people don't see. Overthinking isn't helping you move forward. It's keeping you in place. Because every time you try to figure it out, you're reinforcing the idea that the answer is somewhere inside thought. But what if it's not? What if the reason you can't think your way out is because the problem isn't happening in your thoughts? It's happening in your identification with them. So the more you think, the more you stay inside the very space that's creating the problem. It's like trying to escape a maze by running faster inside of it. There have already been moments where the thinking stopped, maybe just for a second. You were driving, or staring out of the window, or just sitting there after a long day. And suddenly, everything went quiet. No analysis, no pressure, no need to figure anything out. And in that moment, you weren't stuck. Nothing was solved, but the feeling of being trapped was gone. That wasn't an accident. That was a glimpse of what exists beyond the mind. What you touched in that moment was not a better thought. It was what remains when thought is no longer in control. It doesn't try to solve anything. It doesn't need clarity. It doesn't chase answers. It simply is. This is the monad. Not something you achieve, not something you understand, but what has always been here, before every thought, during every thought, and after every thought. It doesn't get stuck. Only the mind does. Overthinking creates a very convincing illusion that if you just think a little more, you'll finally break free. But that's the trap. Because thinking is built on division. It separates past from present, problem from solution, you from peace. So the more you think, the more fragmented everything feels. And the more you try to fix that fragmentation with more thinking, it's self-perpetuating. You're not trapped by your situation. You're trapped in the attempt to mentally control it. This isn't abstract. This is happening in your daily life. It's when you lie in bed, replaying everything you said that day. It's when you keep asking yourself if you made the right decision. It's when you feel something is off in a relationship, and instead of feeling it, you analyze it to death. It's when you try to fix your emotions by understanding them, but nothing shifts, because you're still inside the same loop. And here's the shift. Instead of following the next thought, notice it. Don't fight it. Don't suppress it. Don't try to solve it. Just see it. And in that moment, there's space. A small gap at first, but that gap is everything. Because it's the first time you're not fully inside the loop. You're aware of it. And awareness is already outside of it. Overthinking doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you've been relying on the mind for something it was never meant to provide. Peace doesn't come from solving every thought. It comes from seeing that you don't have to. The moment you stop chasing the answer, you begin to notice what was never missing. Not clarity, not control, but presence. And from that place, you're no longer stuck, because you're no longer trying to escape. You keep thinking your way through life like the next thought will finally be the one that sets you free. The one that explains everything. The one that gives you clarity. But it never really does. It might distract you for a moment. It might give you a temporary sense of control. It might even feel productive. But underneath all of it, you still feel stuck. Because the deeper truth is this. You're not trapped because you don't have enough answers. You're trapped because you keep looking to thought for what thought can never give you. And that's the real conflict. Not your life versus you. Not the world versus peace. But the monad versus thought. In this video, we're going to break down why thought keeps you stuck, why it feels so convincing, and why the freedom you're looking for does not come from thinking better, or harder, or even deeper. Because thought is not the source of your being. It is an activity happening inside awareness. And the moment you confuse that activity for yourself, you begin to live in reaction, tension, and overanalysis. But the monad is not divided. The monad is not spinning. The monad is not trying to figure itself out. It simply is. And once you begin to see the difference between thought and what is aware of thought, something starts to shift. Not because you learned a new belief, but because you stop mistaking noise for the truth. Thought gives the illusion of movement. It makes you feel like you're doing something, like you're making progress, like if you just stay with the problem a little longer, you'll finally break through. But most of the time, what you call working through it is just recycling the same energy in a different language. You think about what happened, then what it meant, then what they meant, then what you should have said, then what might happen next, then how to avoid it, then how to heal it, then how to understand why you're still thinking about it. And now, you're not just dealing with life. You're dealing with life plus the endless commentary about life. This is where people get stuck. Not because they're weak, not because they're broken, but because thought has become their entire relationship with reality. And when thought becomes your only way of meeting life, life starts to feel heavy, distant, and complicated. Because thought cannot live. It can only interpret. The monad is not another thought. It is not a better mindset. It is not a more spiritual idea. And it's not the final conclusion at the end of your inner search. The monad is the silent wholeness that is here before thought speaks. It is the unbroken awareness beneath every mental movement. Thought comes and goes. It changes shape constantly. It reacts to memory, fear, and desire. But the monad does not come and go. It is not improved by your good thoughts. It is not damaged by your bad ones. It is not closer when your mind is quiet and farther when your mind is loud. It is simply what remains untouched while all of that happens. This is why thought can never grasp it. Because thought is always trying to turn reality into pieces. But the monad is whole before the pieces even appear. So the more you try to think your way into it, the more you keep reducing the infinite into mental fragments. And then you wonder why it still feels distant. It feels distant because thought cannot touch what is already prior to thought. This is not abstract. This is your real life. This is what happens when you lie awake at night trying to mentally solve your future. This is what happens when you replay a conversation 10 times and still don't feel settled. This is what happens when you keep asking yourself why you feel off, why you feel disconnected, why nothing feels like enough anymore. This is what happens when you are with people you care about, but part of you is somewhere else, thinking, analyzing, embracing. Thought pulls you out of direct life and into mental life. And mental life has no end. Because every answer creates another question. Every conclusion creates another doubt. Every attempt at control creates more tension. That's why you can be physically resting and still feel exhausted. Why you can have time off and still feel pressure. Why you can meditate, reflect, and still secretly feel trapped. Because the trap is not activity. The trap is identification with thought. When thought becomes me, every passing fear feels personal. Every mental image feels important. Every inner reaction feels like reality itself. But once you begin to see thought as movement rather than identity, a gap opens. And inside of that gap, you begin to breathe again. Realization does not begin when thought becomes perfect. It begins when thought loses its throne. The shift is subtle. You notice a thought, but you don't immediately follow it. You feel fear arise, but you don't instantly become fearful. You hear the inner voice trying to pull you into another spiral, and for a moment, you stay still instead. That stillness matters, because it reveals something most people miss. Thought is happening, but something deeper is aware of it. And that deeper awareness is not panicking. It's not arguing. And it's not trying to become whole. It's already whole. That's the opening. not the destruction of thought, not the war against the mind, not becoming blank or emotionless, just the recognition that thought is not your master. It's an instrument, a tool, a function. It's useful in its place, but it's terrible as an identity. The moment thought stops being authority, presence returns. And with presence comes space. With space comes relief. With relief comes clarity. Not mental clarity, existential clarity. The kind that does not need to explain itself. A lot of people hear this and think the goal is to never think again. That's not the point. Thought has practical value. You need it to plan, communicate, and navigate the world. But thought was never meant to tell you who you are. The problem is not that thought appears. The problem is that you keep kneeling to them as if they are truth, self, and reality all at once. They're not. A thought can say you are failing. A thought can say you are behind. A thought can say you missed your chance. A thought can say you are not enough, or ready, or safe. And if you believe every one of those movements, your entire life becomes a reaction to passing mental weather. But the monad is deeper than the weather. It's deeper than mood, deeper than memory, deeper than identity, deeper than the voice that narrates your existence. You do not need to become the monad. You do not need to reach it. You do not need to mentally solve your way into it. You need to stop giving absolute power to what was never absolute in the first place. And when that happens, life begins to open. Not because the world changed overnight, but because you are no longer trapped inside the interpreter. This is why you're stuck. Not because you're incapable. Not because realization is far away. Not because life forgot about you. You're stuck because thought has been sitting in the place where direct reality should be. And as long as thought is treated like the center of your being, everything will feel filtered, delayed, and complicated. But the monad is not trapped in thought. It's here now. Quiet, whole, unmoved, and aware. And the moment you stop trying to think your way into peace, you begin to notice the peace that was already there before the mind even began speaking. That's the beginning of the shift. Not gaining more, but recognizing what never left. There's a moment you keep running from. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent. No distraction, no noise, no thoughts grabbing your attention. And when it shows up, you reach for something. Your phone, a thought, another distraction, anything to get away from it. But what if that silence is the one thing that you actually need to face? You felt it before. Sitting alone, driving in your car, laying in bed at night. Everything goes quiet for a second, and something feels off. Not painful, not overwhelming, just unfamiliar. So your mind jumps in, starts thinking, starts planning, starts analyzing. Because staying in that silence feels like losing control. But here's what you haven't seen yet. That silence doesn't feel uncomfortable because something is wrong. It feels uncomfortable because something is missing. What's missing? It's the constant noise you've been using to define yourself. Your thoughts, your reactions, your internal commentary. Without that, you don't know who you are. So the mind rushes in to rebuild the noise. Not because it's helping you, but because it's protecting a familiar identity. Look closely at that silence, not as something to escape, but as something to observe. Because in that moment, nothing is actually wrong. There's no problem to solve, no identity to maintain, no story to continue. And yet, you're still here, aware and present. That's the part most people overlook. They think the silence is emptiness, but it's not empty. It's just not filled with what they're used to. That silence isn't something you enter. It's what's left when everything else stops. It's been here the entire time. Under every thought, behind every reaction, before every identity you've ever held. You don't create it. You don't reach it. And you don't become it. It's what remains when you stop trying to be anything. Not a better version of yourself. Not a more peaceful version. Not a more spiritual version. Just what's already here. The discomfort you feel in silence isn't coming from the silence. It's coming from the mind realizing it has nothing to grab onto. It has no problem, no identity, no direction. And without that, it starts to panic. So it creates noise again. Thoughts, concerns, questions. Anything to pull you back into movement. Because as long as you're moving mentally, you don't have to face what's already still. This shows up in ways you don't even notice. You reach for your phone the second things get quiet. You turn on music, or a video, or background noise, even when you don't really want to. You keep conversations going longer than they need to. You replay situations in your head, just to avoid sitting in stillness. Even when you're relaxing, your mind is still running. Because stopping feels unfamiliar. But here's the shift. Next time that silence shows up, don't feel it. Don't analyze it. Don't try to understand it. Just notice it. Not as something happening to you, but as something that's always been there. You don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to deepen it. You don't need to turn it into anything. Just stop leaving it, even for a moment, and that's enough. The silence you've been avoiding was never the problem. It's the one place where nothing needs to be fixed. Nothing needs to be figured out. Nothing needs to be maintained. And the moment you stop running from it, you don't find answers. You don't find meaning. You don't find a better version of yourself. You just stop losing what was never gone. You keep trying to understand what is happening to you. You keep trying to explain the shift, to define the feeling, to mentally organize the thing that keeps slipping through your hands. And the more you try to understand it, the further it slips away. Because this is the trap almost no one sees. What you're trying to understand is not an object in front of you. It is the very reality you are trying to stand apart from in order to explain it. That is why understanding never seems to bring peace. It gives you more language, more concepts, more frameworks, more mental movement, but not resolution. Because the monad is not something the mind can master. And the moment you see that clearly, something in you begins to loosen. A lot of people get stuck here without realizing it. They read more. They watch more. They think more. They try to find the one sentence, the one perspective that will finally make everything click. And for a while, it feels productive. It feels like progress. Because understanding gives the mind a sense of control. It makes you feel like you're doing something, like you're moving toward truth. But if you're honest, you've probably already felt the limit of that. You can understand something deeply and still feel restless. You can explain it beautifully and still feel disconnected. You can talk about awakening and still feel trapped in the same loops. That's the frustration. Not because you're failing, but because what you're looking for was never going to arrive through explanation alone. The mind wants certainty. It wants closure. It wants a complete map. But the monad is not a map. It's not a theory. And it's not a philosophical puzzle waiting to be solved. So if you have been feeling exhausted by trying to mentally force your way into clarity, that does not mean something is wrong with you. It means you are beginning to hit the edge of what understanding can actually do. Understanding is useful in its place. But understanding cannot carry you into what exists before thought. The mind can describe the doorway. It can't walk through it. And that's the part people resist. Because the mind wants to be the hero of the journey. It wants to be the one that figures it out. The one that earns the answer. The one that reaches realization through effort and precision. But realization does not happen because the mind finally wins. It happens when the mind is no longer being mistaken for the one who must. That is why trying harder often makes it worse. The harder you push to understand, the more tightly you stay identified with a mechanism that keeps dividing reality into subject and object. But the monad is not on the other side of that division. It is what remains when the division is no longer being believed in. That's the paradox. You don't realize the monad by finally understanding it better than everyone else. You begin to notice it when the need to stand outside life and mentally possess it starts to fall away. This is why so many people feel a strange kind of disappointment after years of seeking. They expected to find some final concept, some ultimate explanation, some intellectual arrival. But instead, what begins to emerge is simpler than that, quieter than that, less dramatic than that. It is not that you suddenly know more. It is that you stop requiring thought to validate what is already here. You stop demanding that reality become mentally manageable before you allow it to be real. And this is deeply humbling, because most of us were trained to understand above all else. If you can explain it, it feels safe. If you can define it, it feels like it's yours. If you can categorize it, it feels contained. But direct being does not work like that. Love doesn't work like that. Presence doesn't either. And the monad definitely doesn't. You already know this in your own life. There have been moments you could not explain, but knew were real. A silence that changed you. A pause in the middle of pain where something opened up. A moment in nature, in grief, in stillness or exhaustion, where thought briefly stopped and something deeper remained. That was not ignorance. That was contact without conceptual interference. And that is closer to the truth than most of what the mind calls understanding. The monad is not something you understand. It is what is here before understanding begins. It is the undivided reality beneath the mind's constant attempt to separate, label, compare, and control. It is not your latest insight. It's not your spiritual identity. It's not your best explanation or your cleanest philosophy. It is the fact of being itself before the mind turns it into content. And this matters, because many people unknowingly turn the monad into one more object of study, one more thing to chase, one more special concept to hold, another spiritual badge to collect. But the monad is not improved by your understanding of it. It is not brought closer by your effort. And it's not made more real by your ability to articulate it. It's already here. Before the thought, before the question, before the effort to define what this is. The issue is not that the monad is hidden. The issue is that the mind is constantly trying to replace direct reality with mental representation. And then it wonders why life feels thin, why peace feels distant, why truth feels theoretical. Because a concept about water cannot quench thirst, and a concept about the monad cannot replace direct recognition. This is where the trap becomes obvious in real life. You sit alone trying to figure yourself out. You replay conversations. You analyze your emotional state. You try to solve your confusion by naming it more accurately. Or maybe you watch video after video, hoping the next one will finally complete the picture. Or you keep revisiting the same questions. What am I missing? What does this mean? Why do I understand it, but still not feel free? And underneath all of it is the same assumption. If I can just understand this enough, I'll finally be at peace. But look closely. Has endless interpretation ever really brought peace? Or has it mostly brought more mental activity? Has your inner life become clearer or more crowded? Because the mind doesn't want answers. It wants to remain in control. But peace does not arrive when the mind finishes controlling the experience. Peace begins when control is no longer the center of experience. And that can feel threatening at first. Because without constant understanding, the false self feels exposed. It feels like it's losing its ground. Good. That false ground was never stable to begin with. What does this look like in your real life? It looks like being in the car after work, mentally replaying your whole day, trying to understand why you feel off, and then noticing that the moment you stop chasing the reason, there's breath, space, and quiet. It looks like being in conflict with someone you love, desperately trying to figure out who is right, and then noticing that beneath all of the mental noise, there's awareness that is already here. It looks like lying in bed at night trying to understand your life, and realizing that the pressure to understand is the very thing keeping your nervous system locked. It looks like sitting in meditation, not trying to force revelation, but simply allowing what is here to be here. That's where the shift becomes real. Not in abandoning intelligence, but in putting thought back in its proper place. Use the mind when it is needed. Let it solve practical problems. Let it communicate. Let it learn. But don't ask it to do what it cannot do. Do not ask it to contain the whole. The mind is a tool. The monad is the ground. Once you stop confusing the tool for the ground, something softens. You stop trying to conquer reality through explanation. You stop treating peace like a conclusion. You stop turning every experience into something to decode. And in that softening, what was always here becomes easier to notice. Not because you finally understood it, but because you stop standing in the way with your need to understand. The monad does not become available when your mind reaches the perfect conclusion. It becomes obvious when the need to mentally possess reality begins to fall apart. That's why understanding never fully works. It's not because understanding is bad. It's because the deepest truth of what you are cannot be captured from a distance. It can only be recognized directly. So the next time you feel yourself trying to force clarity, stop and notice what is already here before the explanation arrives. Your breath, the silence around you, your awareness. The simple fact that existence is present before thought comments on it. That's not nothing. That's the opening. If this journey spoke to you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone ready to experience life beyond thought. Comment below. Have you been chasing understanding instead of direct recognition? I read every comment. If you would like to support my work directly, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/magnumopus333. Or you can explore some original merchandise at my Teespring store online. The link is in the description below. remember, your consciousness is the key that unlocks reality. Let's keep unlocking it together. Thank you for watching. Until next time.